Shalom and welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. We're continuing our work in Jeremiah chapter 10, where Jeremiah in these first few verses has been underlining the folly, the foolishness of constructing an idol. And we're going to finish up that little subsection here with verse 5. Interesting verse. Let's go ahead and read it in Hebrew as we get started. Ketomer mikshar hema velo yedaberu. Naso yinnasu, kilo yitzadu, al tir'u mehem, kilo yareu, vegam hetev en otam. So we start off with kitomer. So we have our little preposition ke, which means like or as. So as Tomer miksha. Now this phrase here is a little bit interesting. Now most of our translations are going to translate tomer as scarecrow. You think, well, that's sort of interesting. This is a word that only shows up twice. And the other place where it shows up is in Judges chapter 4, verse 5, where it's talking about the palm tree of Deborah. So it seems to be some sort of an erect palm tree, perhaps along that line. So, but we wonder, why don't we translate it palm tree here? Well, let's leave it as palm tree for now. Miksha is a word which is often translated as cucumber field, and this only shows up, interestingly, in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 8, which talks about a hut or something that's been out there in the middle of a cucumber field as well, or a field as well. But now this expression, this same expression actually shows up in an apocryphal book, well, what we call the letter of Jeremiah, chapter 6, verse 70 in that book. So it's not in our Hebrew Old Testament, but the Septuagint translates it very clearly as some sort of a scarecrow or something to chase away, to make people afraid in a field of cucumbers. So that's why we end up translating tomer here as this erect thing, maybe a palm tree, but again, on the basis of this letter of Jeremiah, which is in the book of Baruch, the apocryphal book of Baruch, it's translated as a scarecrow in a field of cucumbers. And most of our modern translations are going to translate that. Palm tree doesn't seem to fit quite as well. Miksha seems to be something having to do with being hammered, if you were to take it from some of its other uses. But the word itself is only found in this construction, like I said here. So it's a little bit unusual. I'll show you one or two things in the translations when we get to them later. So if we translate this as a scarecrow in a field of cucumbers, they are. So this is they. This is our pronouns. This is our personal pronoun. It's a 3MP, and it's referring back to the idols. They do nothing. They're just lifeless. And they do not speak. So we have here, this is an imperfect being used almost in a present sense here. It's a 3MP and it's a PL from our usual word dabar. So they do not speak. So this is referring again to the idols. We can translate it, they cannot speak. Not just that they don't, but they're not even able to. And then here we have a naso. Now this, you see this O vowel here showing up between the second and third consonant. That's a pretty good sign. We're going to have an infinitive absolute. Now it's going to be a cal, and it's going to be followed by a conjugated form of the same verb, which is a little bit different because we would expect usually an aleph we would expect this ending instead. What we're going to have here is a yod at the beginning, and u. If we were normally to expect the u at the end, and this is going to be an imperfect being used in the same, almost an ongoing present sense like we have over here. It's going to be a 3MP, and it's going to be a nifal this time. You see this pathak underneath the letter here? This is the nun of the verb itself. This is not the nun of the nifal. The nun of the nifal is in that little dogish right there. And then you find comments underneath with an I-class vowel underneath the performative. So typical signs of an imperfect nifal. And it's from our verb nasa. Now why do we have this u ending, which normally would be the supportative, between the second and third letters here? That's a little bit unusual. Some people think it's maybe a scribal error. Other people think this is referring a little bit more to Arabic orthography, there's a little discussion you can find in the commentaries on this, and I'll refer you to that. It's not totally anomalous to find, when you have such a weak consonant like the aleph, to find the letters transposed. So once in a while that does happen, and that could be all that we're looking at here. But it would have the sense, nasa, of course, which means to carry. So this would be in the nifal, this would be to be carried. And usually when we have an infinitive absolute, we find the infinitive absolute in the same conjugation or stem as the conjugated verb. But here we don't. The infinitive absolute is in the kal, and the conjugated verb is in the nifal. Again, that's not totally unusual. We're underlining the certainly idea, the very strong assertion with the infinitive absolute here. They must be carried. They must always be carried. They must certainly be carried, as the idea with this passive idea with the nifal over here. So again, referring to the idols, they are not able to speak. They have to be carried. Indeed, we can almost translate it. For not, and then what do we have here? Well, this is just a regular imperfect. It's going to be a 3MP, yod at the beginning, u at the end, and it's a kal, and it's from our verb sa'ad, which not a very high-frequency verb, but it's a verb that means to walk, or maybe to take a step, to march, perhaps. The idea of taking a step. So in this context here, they can't even take a step. They can't walk. They can't march. They're not able to transport themselves. Do not. Now here's our negative, and we're used to seeing this with an imperfect, and that's we have tau at the beginning, u at the end, so it's going to be an imperfect. It's going to be a 2MP, and it's a kal from our verb yara, which means to be afraid, to fear. And the imperfect being used in with a negation over here has a jussive sense, and it's the equivalent of a negative imperative. We've seen this several times in Jeremiah, even in this chapter 10. So we would translate this, do not fear, and fearing from someone is the way we use a direct object more often in English. Don't fear them. Hebrew would tend to use this preposition min, which you reject the nun here, you lengthen the vowel instead. Do not fear from them. So do not fear them. Why shouldn't we fear them? Because lo yareu, because not doing evil. Now, what do we have over here? Well, this is an imperfect. IMPF. It's got a yod at the beginning, u at the end. And this is going to be, this one here is going to be a 3MP. And it's a hifil. And it's from the verb ra'ah with a double ayin. And one of these disappears in this particular case because it's the geminate verb like that. And it means to do evil. So they are not doing evil. And again, like we saw over here, they're not able to walk, they're not able to speak. We would probably want to translate this, the ability again, and add that idea to it as well. They are not able to do evil. And even, gam, that's sort of a little particle, means even doing good. Now this is an infinitive. Like we saw earlier, this is an infinitive absolute. This time it happens to be a hifil from the verb yatav, which means to be good. So the hifil means to do good, to cause something good to happen. So this is an imperfect. They're not able to do evil. And even doing good, that is not non-existent. That's our negative particle of existence. There is not otam. It looks like a direct object marker, but here it's probably the preposition et, meaning with. So sometimes it takes this form when you add the 3MP suffix, which is what we have here. So this is with them. So doing good, it doesn't exist with them. It doesn't exist with them at all. They're not able to do evil, and they're not able to do good. They can't do anything. So why be afraid of these things? They are absolutely lifeless and ineffective in any of their influence. So that's the basic work that we've done there. Let's go ahead and hide it now and take a look at just a couple translations. Almost all of our translations are going to be pretty literal, and they're going to go in the direction of the New American Standard, 2020 version this time. They are like a scarecrow in a cucumber field. See, I told you that's the more typical translation that we find. And they cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. They cannot take a step. Do not fear them, for they can do no harm, nor can they do any good. Doing good is not with them. So pretty standard, and everything, most of our translations are going to go in that direction. There's just a couple that do it a little bit different. The Old King James and even the New King James picks up this other idea. They are upright like a palm tree. So they're translating miksha as this idea of some sort of a hammered work, which has been the work of a craftsman. Oh, that sort of fits the context, and it's been set upright. Now, the upright idea comes from the comparison with the palm tree. So, like a pillar being set up like a palm tree, something like that. So they avoid the scarecrow and the cucumber field, which we got sort of more from the external sources in the Septuagint. And they want to keep this idea. This is really the minority opinion among the commentators. William McCain, in his commentary in the ICC series, has a pretty good discussion of this little expression up here, by the way, if you want to go back and look at that. They are upright like a palm tree. They cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot go by themselves. I like that for this word up here. They cannot go, can't take a step. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor can they do any good. How foolish to turn to any other source, especially something made by the hands of man, and trying to find any source of meaning or help in something that man's hands themselves have made. Well, check back with us soon as we continue working through this great chapter 10 in the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Shalom.